Co-chairing this panel with me is Joelle Lingat. She is the National Secretary General of ANC USA. She is a National Democratic Youth and Student ANC USA, a National Democratic Youth and Students Organization. She is based in Jersey City and recently completed her JD at CUNY School of Law. So I give you Joelle.
So who's awake right now? Last plenary. Oh yeah, last plenary. It'll be so cool. All right. So thank you, Judy, for that really awesome introduction. First off, to kick us off on Latin America, we have Charo Mina-Rojas, who's part of the Proceso de Comunidades Negras en Colombia, the PCN, and part of the Colombian Ethnic Commission for Peace. She is a Colombian-born Black feminist and human rights activist, member, national leadership, and international working group. She's part of the Black community's process in Colombia, part of the Ethnic Commission responsible for inclusion of an ethnic chapter in the recent peace agreement between the Colombian government and the guerrilla group FARC-EP, and founder and member US-based Afro-Colombian Solidarity Network. So let's give it up for Charo.
Thank you. Well, it's very relieving. Is that the word? To have, some soul sisters and brothers here that help me to feel strong in this, especially when I have to reduce so much, I would like to say, to 8 minutes or so. But because after all these days here, a couple days here, listening to all these experiences and sharing with all of you, I really have a lot to say, but I want to share with you a very particular experience, recent experience in Colombia with the 22-day strike in Buenaventura. Before I get there, I just want to go very briefly and really quick because many of you know this background, but I want to give a little bit of background before I get to the specifics of Buenaventura. First of all, I want to say, as we have repeated here for a couple days already, that we understand in Colombia, Black people in Colombia understand that Blacks are under attack. We feel under attack. We are in war, and in a state of war. And I gathered some of the words that have been used here because are very meaningful in this struggle and this sense of war and urgency that we have, that came from the conversations and the things that have been saying these couple days here. Occupation is one of them. Fear is another one. Modern slavery. Isolation, stigmatization, dispossession, and I have to emphasize, as I was doing in the workshop, that for us this dispossession is not just the material dispossession, but also the cultural, the spiritual, the territorial, the environmental dispossession of all of us, but in my case, particularly the Black people in Colombia. A very significant loss for us because it's part of what we are. And homogenization also. And I put this word here because part of our struggle is a struggle to be different and be identified as different. We are Black people. We are not everybody. We are not like everybody. We in Colombia are different than the rest of the Colombian society, and we want to be identified as such, and we want to be respected as such, and we want to develop as people in that difference. So we are in the middle of this war. Thank you. A war that is imposing on us a paradigm of development, well-being, and the being itself. It's imposing on us what and who we have to be. And that's why I strengthened this idea of the right to be different. I know who I am, and know ideas of development and well-being and beauty and aesthetical are going to tell me anything different, but that I am a very beautiful and proud Black woman.
Yeah.
Indeed. We can move at the next, my great helper here. So we are in this world of racial capitalism, right? Is what we have been talking about here. And where in our particular situation is neoliberalism and this extractive economy imposing in our territories and this state violence and intervention constantly encroaching our territories and annihilating our communities. Now, this is happening in Colombia. I'm talking about Colombia, a country of 46 million people, one very strategic ally of the United States, and we can pass to the next slide. Thank you. A very strategic ally of the United States, as you can see, the location, very strategic location, geographical location, but also it's strategic because it has some of the most rich lands in the world. We hold 10% of the natural resources, genetic resources of the world. The richness of the world, 10% of that is in Colombia. And I will show you in a minute in what territories. The next slide is showing us that there is Black people in Colombia. We are 10 beautiful million Afro-descendant Black Raizal Palenquero people. Raizal people is the ones that are in these two small black spots or dark spots in the map from San Andres and Providencia. And all the dark spots are where mostly Afro-descendant or Black people is located. Half of that population are women. I'm going to pass to the next slides relatively quickly, just to say that we owe 14.8 about million acres of land collectively titled. That's about 5% of the whole Colombian territory. And this is part of one of the greatest achievements of our struggle, to have those lands collectively titled, because that allow us to protect those lands as we have been protecting them ancestrally for centuries. We now have some legal framework that help us to ensure that no multinational, no government, no political, no policy comes to those territories without our consultation and our consent. Then the next couple of slides are maps, and I just want that you remember the prior one. If you go to the prior one, prior to this one. No, that's the next. So remember that brown area. And then let's go to the next slide to see Colombia, 70% of the territory is rural. That's the green map. The most light green areas are the total rural areas, is how the map is placed. You compare those green areas in the what is this, west, the coast, that's the Pacific coast, and the brown area in the map, right? And you see how they are related. Where Black people is located is mostly rural areas, although internal displacement and the internal armed conflict have displaced over 1 million of people to the cities. Just Black people, I'm talking just Black people. The total internal displaced people in Colombia is 6 million people. But just Blacks is 1.5 million people from those, mostly from the Pacific coast, those very green areas in the west. And then in the next map, you can see paramilitary presence in Colombia. And if you compare those red areas with the very green areas and the very brown areas where black people is located, then you can start making, right, your analysis and conclusions. Now, I mentioned that we can move to the next one. And I'm basically running here because my 8 minutes. But as I mentioned, we have a legal framework, national and international. Our main set of legal framework is based on the Law 70, signed in 1993, that, among other things, allow us to have collective title of our lands. But then there is a set of international laws, and it's in the next slide. One of them, very important, is ILO 169 Convention, because in that framework, we can be recognized as, well, in the ILO is mentioned as tribal people, right? But as a people. And then I'm going to narrow this down to Buenaventura. Buenaventura is, thank you. Buenaventura is one of the main ports, right now is the main port in Colombia and one of the most important ports in the region, in the Americas. I want to make here a parenthesis. I heard yesterday and I heard here when I come to the United States that you talk about the Americans referring to United States. And I would like to point out that I'm part of the Americas, and I'm not in the United States. So it's good to, it's part of the exercise when we name things and recognize ourselves, you know, that this is not America, this is part of the Americas, and so I can be part of it. Otherwise, you know, I wouldn't be able to recognize into the region. Buenaventura then is one of the most important ports in the region, 500,000 people, 17 free trade agreements have signed Colombia with different countries, one of them United States, another very close by Canada, very invested in Colombia. 70% of the territories of the land, 80%, I'm sorry, of the land or the territory of Buenaventura is compromised with large-scale projects for expansion of the port, tourist projects, and other infrastructure to allow the development of the port and the entering of the development to the country. Then Buenaventura has been suffering, that's the next slide, very strong systematic violence. And here you see how the human rights are more heavy than the profit, but that is not, if you can read what is in there, it's not because of the effective exercise of the rights, but the violation of the rights. So in Buenaventura, like in Colombia, profit is more important than people and human rights. And you can see by the violation how heavy is the weight of that violation, and particularly Buenaventura. CNN, CBC, no CNN, CBC called it in 2014 Buenaventura the new capital of horror because they finally find out after a decade of extreme violence by paramilitary groups in the neighborhoods of Buenaventura that there were chopping houses where casas de pique were houses that were seized by paramilitary groups where they would cut in pieces alive people for whatever reason they will consider they have to kill it. Most of them human rights defenders and people that were defending the right to the collective life, the protection of the territories. So with a lot of pressure, the government finally recognized that these kind of practices and places exist in many neighborhoods in Buenaventura. And this is a practice that has been spread all over the country wherever paramilitaries have presence. I'm not going to go through the numbers because you have been able to read them, but I'm going to get to the very specific action. Buenaventura is also a city that, despite the fact of being so important, doesn't have water. People don't have water in Buenaventura. There are no proper sewage systems. There is no proper education and access to education. There is no health. There is no a hospital that can serve people. People have to go 3 hours away to get assistance. So at some point, the communities get tired of it and decide to have a 20-day, not 20-day, they decide to have an endless strike, as long as it will take until the government would come and sit down and agree with the 8 points that they have to discuss with the government. So the picture that you can show the next slide, please. They call the strike to live in a strike, city strike to live in dignity and peace. And it took 22 days of very strong strike. You can see the massive mobilization. This mobilization happened after 2 days of the strike, where people have blocked the main roads of entrance to Buenaventura, and the Special Riot Force attacked violently and viciously the areas where the people were holding the blocks. Then the very next day, over 200,000 people came to the streets and took over the streets and just blocked those main roads for a whole day. And from there, they just keep coming to the streets every single day. During the morning, early in the morning, from 2:30 in the morning to 9 in the morning, this special riot will come with tear gas and rubber bullets. I finally say it right. Rubber bullets, and start attacking the neighborhoods. At 2:30 in the morning, when everybody's sleeping, no blocking roads, but sleeping, and the children are in their houses, they were throwing tear gas to the houses, to the neighborhoods. 60 children we have counted up to a week ago. 60 children were severely affected by the tear gas. Over 300 people, mostly elder, injured, severely affected by the gas when they came out of the houses because were suffocated. They will be shot with these rubber bullets and attacked by the police. And every single day we can continue it. Every single day, you can go to the pictures, people will come back to the streets to hold those blocks, to block the roads in a very peaceful way with their cultural activities, with their recreational activities. You can see, for instance, there was one day when it was raining and kids were playing soccer on the street. That was the ways to block also. Many mobilizations around the country, different cities, different places start mobilizing in solidarity and support to Buenaventura. This is water, because the mobilization happened also in water. Remember, this is a port. So boats came out. My organization mobilized over 150 boats from the rivers. The communities bring out their canoes and the boats. And the public transportation also by boat also were mobilizing in the water, and they hold the main pass, the channel of the big boats for several hours to prevent the pass of those boats. So the city was shut down. The port wasn't working for 22 days. Trucks weren't allowed to pass to get their cargo. And finally, an agreement was reached at 22 days. People continued to be organized, to be meeting, because the agreement is there, but to get them to actually be implemented is another thing. So people continued and meetings and organizing. I have a minute. Continued organizing, continued working, continued meeting with the government, discussing how this is going to be implemented to ensure that effectively this agreement that is going to end in a development plan for the city. Is going to, for 10-year development plan is going to happen. What makes this possible, in my last few seconds, what makes this possible? First, the determination and the dignity of Black people. We were tired of being, with the food in our heads all the time. And people, as you saw and I just mentioned, after the first attack of tear gas, what their response was to come massively to the streets to say, okay, here we are. But then the rest of the Black communities in the country start responding to this and doing mobilizations in the cities, holding a group of women actually hold a official's office to call attention on the demands of Buenaventura. International solidarity was present, mobilizations in Washington and different parts were present, and a very strong networking networks in different places, the United States, Canada, Europe, also helped to help. But the dignity of people and the unity of people were possible, allowed this to be possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Charo, for that very insightful discussion about what's happening in Colombia on the ground right now. So it's my honor to introduce Mr. James Ricks. He's a Muslim member of the Ithaca Catholic Workers Upstate Coalition to Ground the Drones and End the Wars, and Sean Greenwood Truth and Reconciliation Group. He has participated in a peace march from Islamabad to northern Pakistan and an African heritage delegation to Palestine. And as is written in his bio, most importantly, he is an excellent grandfather. So give it up for Mr. James.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here, and just to prove that that last line is true, Benunu, that's for Hassan, my grandson. He knows what that means, okay? Also, I would like to first recognize the land that we stand on. Normally, we do this in confrontational type of protest, or even when we are amongst ourselves, and I haven't noticed that take place, and we're standing on misappropriated indigenous land, and we should all realize that. It comes up a lot because I go to trial a lot for protest, and many times there are a bunch of charges. It seems like they grab them out of a grab bag, but usually trespass is one of them, and I would ask the judge, I find it a bit confusing that you would charge me with trespass on land that you've stolen. So I did write a short poem that I'm gonna do, I did it at the beginning of our trial, and at the beginning of one of our trials, and I'll get right into it. It's Doctrine of Discovery, Manifest Destiny. You took most, but you won't touch the rest of me. I was your host until you toasted me. Not with champagne, but with treachery, deception, death, blood, fire, and pain, and annihilation, from sea to shining sea. Assimilate, lose yourself, vanish, that's your key. The key. What, you don't understand? You look confused, and I'll have to hold that land, and when you're well, I'll return a piece. Something small you'll be able to manage. After all, you were our first collateral damage, and whoa, no, collateral damage. What about those blankets gifted with deadly disease that killed our men and our women and our children too? It's no wonder when you view the future or past, it's with such a deservedly paranoid view. I'm here tonight to speak about drones. We do anti-drone protests at Hancock Airport outside of Syracuse, and basically they're remotely piloted aircraft. And what is the effect of drones? What is the effect? It's, from our side of it, it's a clean weapon, something that doesn't bring back body bags and wounded soldiers, no feet on the ground. It makes it easy to commit war crimes. Every time a drone lands in a sovereign country, it's a war crime. A targeted assassination is a war crime. To differentiate between militants and collateral damage, they're all war crimes. A targeted assassination is a war crime, pure and simple. And it seems that most of the people that are determined to be militants, that it's either beforehand, but mostly post-mortem. Anybody that gets hit by a drone is tended to be described as a militant. And that is absolutely not true. We have a system called, I'm sorry, I know what I'm talking about, but I forgot the exact name. Thank you. He was in our work group. It's a signature strike. And these are strikes that are formed on some kind of equation, some formula about the movement of people, how they gather, how many times they gather. And I don't know what the formula is, but what they determine that when there's a group and it's met enough times, they become a viable strike. And it destroys the community. It destroys, what holds the community together. Children are told not to play together. I heard just the other day on the news that the Russians had dropped a bomb and killed 300 people. They found it questionable because in those areas, people don't gather in those numbers anymore. We've bombed wedding parties, people waiting at bus stops, jirgas where elders meet to try to determine what's going to take place in the community. These are targets. Once they see with the signature strike that they gather together, they are considered a legitimate strike. And it's kind of academic, the way we speak about what's happening to these people. I've seen it in court, I've seen it in meetings amongst drone protesters. Sometimes when we discuss it, it seems so civilized, and it is on this end of it, but at the business end of those drones, it's a bloody mess. It's a massacre. It's really horrifying. And one thing that really I find especially troubling is that when I see who's killed, I don't see any white people. I even asked in court, would we find this discussion a little more immediate, less civilized and controlled? Excuse me, I'm fasting and my mouth is very dry, so excuse me for stumbling along here. But if the people were killed were little white children and mothers picking their children's limbs out of trees, were in Ireland or Italy or France, and God forbid that it ever happens there. But would people find this a conversation more immediate if the ones they saw being killed were more familiar to themselves? Sometimes these drone reports sound like a baseball score. There were so many killed, so many suspected militants. Excuse me.
Oh, go ahead. 1 minute.
Oh, wow. Okay. I wanted to get to, we had a trial recently, and what we usually get caught up on is trying to defend ourselves against the charges that the state puts on us. And these are nothing but grab bag charges they're using to try to distract from the fact that we're saying you're committing war crimes at that base in our name and it needs to stop. This always happens, and it's a natural urge to defend yourself. Somebody said you trespassed, you want to say, no, I didn't, but we said it didn't matter. We came here to deliver an indictment to the commander of that base for war crimes and accusing the chain of command right up to the President of the United States. And one last thing I want to state, I'm Muslim, and okay. And I've been taught, I've heard so many different perspectives. Some of them I understand, some of them are a little bit confusing for me, but I always go back to, we're taught that when you see something wrong, you stop it with your hand. If you can't do that, then you speak out against it. And if you can't do that, at least abhor it in your heart, and this is the weakest of faith.
Thank you. And as he said, we're going to end this last plenary with a bang, so thank you for giving us such great insight onto that. So next up, we have Sarah Flounders, who is the co-director of the International Action Center. She's editor and co-author of 10 IAC books, regular writer for the Workers' World newspaper, member, UNAC's Administrative Committee, a coordinator of the Hands Off Syria Coalition, and board member, National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. She believes in resistance and in revolutionary change. So give it up for Sarah.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you to this very patient audience. It's really been quite an incredible day. I was asked to speak on the Saudi Arabia attack and threats on Qatar, where they have ordered the cut of all shipments by land, sea, air, the freezing of all accounts, the stopping even of shipping food and from Qatar into Qatar, totally dependent on food shipments. And it's all a demand and part of the US war drive against Iran. Now, I want to step into it, though, from another direction, so bear with me. Today, there were thousands of people in the streets in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in New York, in cities around the country for Philando Castile. Again, another cop not guilty. It's a racist, rigged system, the latest crime in a racist, rigged system. And these are people who turned out in the street on a day's notice. This is the challenge of linking together struggles, big, powerful, angry struggles, determinately angry. Now, I want to thank the UNAC conference. These panels have been a crash course of struggles from around the world, and you can really learn a lot, and there's an incredible amount been packed in. It's a challenge to figure out how to fit all this in and together. The role of the corporate media is always to tell us that we are insignificant and that these movements are insignificant. There's every effort to marginalize our struggles, and we internalize that. At the same time, we should recognize that the U.S. have not succeeded. They have not won one of the wars they've engaged in the last 20-some years. They've inflicted massive damage, horrendous on a scale. But this is an empire, a system that is in serious decline and decay. But back to the people's movement that gets marginalized. In the past year, there have been hundreds of thousands, literally millions of people in the street, sometimes on a day's notice, and sometimes for long periods. Let's think about the thousands, tens of thousands, who went to Standing Rock. In the broiling sun and the freezing cold, camped for weeks under the most difficult conditions. Hardly a line in the media, but an incredible struggle right here. We could talk about the tens of thousands who turned out on a few hours' notice at the airports against the attacks on the Muslim population. That was quite an incredible experience. This past weekend, when there were what were called anti-Sharia law demonstrations by Islamic hate groups and white supremacists, in every single city they were outnumbered more than 10-1. That's important. As we look at ourselves and think what we're capable of, we should look at the May Day demonstrations in some of the cities across the US. This year, last year, year before, over years. And the shut 'em down, take 'em down of these racist statues. Even on the anti-war front, and I know being part of trying to build so many days of coordinated action on Syria, and then the latest bombing, less than 20 hours time, there were demonstrations in 20 cities that were big and militant and a surprise. So there's a tinderbox. There's a tinderbox, there's growing anger, there's deep alienation. It's more sharply anti-capitalist than at any time that I can remember in my time. It's people who can feel the rot and the decay and know they have no future. And they look at the fabulous concentration of wealth. Now, the folks in this room are operating in many different movements, addressing the war at home, which are so real, and the wars abroad. And how we make those links, we have to become more conscious of, more appreciative of each other and the message that we're trying to get across. Now, there's coming further escalation in Syria. We got to take that serious. But this latest, Trump makes a trip to Saudi Arabia, and within days, an attack on Qatar, also a feudal monarchy, completely in an alliance with Saudi Arabia until that minute, actually participating in the Saudi war in Yemen. And suddenly it flipped. Part of the starving down. So our contribution is explaining these complex wars, which are not easy to predict, to understand, to know the basis for, but they're based on an absolute desperation of this decaying system that's losing its hold everywhere and trying to force a line, trying to enforce, even among the Gulf countries, a line against Iran and its preparation for war on Iran. And it's enormously dangerous because we don't know at what moment it will break out. We also know it can go against them. What Saudi Arabia has achieved so far is they actually split the Gulf Coordination Council. That's kind of interesting. And then when Turkey rushed supplies also to Qatar and Germany spoke against it, seems they split NATO. That's good. So everything doesn't go according to their plans, but that can become even more dangerous in how it unravels. And I want to connect it, what's happening in Qatar, what's happening in Saudi Arabia, in the Gulf states, to even what's happening here. You know, the Boston bus drivers, when they sent a message, that union today, about the workers shaping up and they're listening to the news two ways. Okay, a minute. both the attack on the working conditions right here, the racist attacks, the home front of their own country, in Haiti, in Cape Verde, in Mexico. It's workers listening two sides, two things about what's happening in the world. It's true not only in the United States. Look at Britain, this surprise election. Well, the British working class changed. It's Caribbean, it's African, it's South Asian, it's Arab. There are a lot of surprises for the ruling circles. Consider Qatar. 90% of Qatar are migrant workers. There's one family that owns the whole country. That's not a very stable regime. It's a site of the largest US air base, and next door in Bahrain is the largest Navy base, and now the two are at loggerheads. That should be interesting. So we don't know how those things will play out. Consider Saudi Arabia. More than a third of the population is migrant workers. This is who actually builds a country, builds the huge construction projects, keeps the oil pumping. And they have no loyalty to any of these regimes, you can bet. And why threaten Iran? Iran hasn't invaded, attacked. It's because the oil is nationalized in one country since the Iranian Revolution. And that is a threat to the Gulf states, a threat to the US. Let me conclude on this, because today the Middle East, the Gulf states, the whole region to the Horn of Africa, enormous instability, and they can't put it back together. They're using more and more military measures. And from here, at the United National AntiWar Coalition, we have to be thinking about it, addressing it, while at the same time making more and more deep links to the struggle here at home. Because the struggle here at home is getting also much rougher, uglier, harder in every direction. The majority of workers are what they call precarious workers, no stability. So this is what is ahead of us. I want to end with a chant so old and yet so true for today, for the whole world, for the movement here, and for the challenge ahead. The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. People united will never be defeated. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for that very appropriate chant. And so now I'm going to introduce the co-chair, the other co-chair for this panel, who will be introducing the rest of our speakers. So Judith Bello is a founding member of the Upstate Coalition to Ground the Drones and End the Wars, and is a member of UNAC's Administrative Committee. She has spent time in jail for civil resistance actions, visited drone strike victims in Pakistan, and traveled with peace delegates to Iran, Kurdish Iraq, and Syria. Judith blogs at deconstructedglobe.com and administers the website upstatedroneaction.org. So let's give it up for Judith.
Hi. Well, we're coming to the home stretch here, and we're talking about the issues of the day, and it's really exciting to see the connections emerging. Right now, we're going to have a couple of speakers who will speak about the Middle East. We're going to start with Jeff Mcclure. Jeff is the National Secretary of Socialist Action. He's director of the Mobilization to Free Mumia Abu Jamal, author of Free, Free Palestine and Tragedy of Libya, the US-NATO war disguised as humanitarian intervention. And Jeff is a member of the UNAC Administrative Committee. So welcome, Jeff.
How's that? You reminded me that in 1959-60, I was a member of SNCC as well. And that's where I was taught my evil ways and got arrested 9 times for various sit-ins and never convicted for one. We desegregated a lot of places in those days. I think there's been some pretty harsh criticism of imperialism during this conference, but nobody mentions the good side of imperialism. For example, President Obama, after he finished the G20 nation visit, went to Laos, and he publicly apologized to the Laotian people, who he's exploiting at slave labor wages, because the United States dropped 280 million bombs, reported in the New York Times, in Laos during the period of the Vietnam War. And he said, I'm very sorry about that. And young people are still dying on unexploded bombs. We should give him credit, shouldn't we? Then there's President Clinton, Bill, who publicly apologized to the people of Guatemala for the United States supporting its death squad there that killed 400,000 Guatemalans. I'm sorry, he said. No apologies for Vietnam. 4 million slaughtered in a genocidal war with poison gas, white phosphorus, napalm. Alan Greenspan, the head of former head of the Federal Reserve, wrote a 1,000-page book, sort of a biography, and he said that the United States organized the coup in 1953 that overthrew the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh. Why? Said the New York Times reporter. He said, well, there was a 900-pound gorilla in the room. What was that? He said, they were the second largest oil source in the world, and it was a matter of national security for the United States. National security of the United States. In Iraq, they haven't apologized for murdering 1.5 million people in a war that they began because they said that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. No apologies. 1.5 million dead. In Libya, they wiped out the infrastructure of that country and killed tens of thousands of people on the grounds that the Gaddafi government was about to slaughter 50,000 people in Benghazi. How many of you heard that? Not one was slaughtered in Benghazi, and British intelligence said not one later was threatened with destruction, and they destroyed that country. President Obama, the great man, is credited with drawing down troops from 100,000 to 10,000 in Afghanistan today. But he doesn't mention that in Afghanistan, the U.S. used the largest privatized military forces in the world and had 50,000 private murderers paid for by the government secretly. Now let's get to Libya. The truth about Libya is that not that Hillary Clinton threatened a no-fly zone, is that the U.S. government and the military and Trump are overseeing a no-fly zone, a real no-fly zone in Syria today. My source and all the sources here, in case you're credible, you question my credibility, is the New York Times and its chief Middle Eastern bureau chief, Anna Barnard. She pointed out that a New York Times embedded journalist interviewed General Harrington, who is in charge of all U.S. Air Forces in Syria, a U.S. general in charge of the Air Force flying over Syria, without the consent of the Syrian government. And Harrington bragged to this New York Times reporter as he showed him a $60 million radar machine that marks every plane flying over Syria in different colors, that is Syrian government planes, US planes, and Russian planes. And the general bragged that the United States government Air Force, the greatest in the world, maintains 24/7 surveillance over Syria, especially northern Syria, refuels round the clock, and it assigns its jets to intercept and force, under penalty of being shot at, every plane over Syria that is not U.S. government, each week progressively further away, to maintain that no-fly zone. The general reported that they restrict the bombs that they drop on ISIS only in the northeast and west in order to force ISIS troops to the south of Syria so they can join the so-called fake rebel opposition, including the al-Qaeda terrorists and the US-backed and Gulf monarchy-backed terrorists in that country to establish another no-fly zone in southern Syria. Why? They asked the general. And he said, because there's eventually going to be a negotiated settlement and the US government wants troops on the ground. Our troops, our finance troops, our fake troops, our death squad special operation troops, and our advisors on the ground in order to negotiate the future of Syria. That was the bragging rights of the general. There was a legitimate rebellion that most everybody during the Arab Spring reported in Syria. Young people went out fighting for democratic rights, and peasants in a massive drought who were hungry asked for aid for the government. It was refused. They protested, and their protests were repressed, and almost from day one then on, the United States said, Syria is the next Libya. We're going after Syria. They organized the Free Syrian Army. They financed the generals, the 2 or 3 that defected. And they organized al-Qaeda and others to fire on civilians and blame it on the Assad government. And ever since that day, the United States has been at war through NATO, through the entire Gulf monarchy and all of its allies. Their so-called coalition is there to remove the Assad government, not because they disagree with its policies, they were previous allies of Assad, but because they seek to control at whatever cost every corner of this earth, every continent, every human being in order to exploit their labor for the profits of the capitalist bigots, racists. The United States government created ISIS and they created al-Qaeda. And they literally admit in the New York Times over and over again that these so-called US-backed rebels would not exist if they were not totally embedded in the forces of al-Qaeda, financed by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf monarchies and the United States government. So they maintain this no-fly zone over the country because they want a piece of Syria. They couldn't get it all. ISIS and al-Qaeda occupied 2/3 of the country. They've been driven out for most of it by the Syrian army and its allies. Now let's talk about allies. UNAC takes no position on the government of Assad. Some support it, some don't. But everybody in UNAC supports Syria's right to self-determination. And that right to self-determination means that we support Syria's right to invite other nations to defend it against imperialist attack. And that means we don't put on UNAC's banners Russia out now or Hezbollah out now or Iran out now. They are all victims of imperialism. But we demand US out now because it's not there at the request of the Syrian people or Syrian government. We don't accept any of the lies. The monster Assad, they said, killed 500,000 people. Who the hell do you think occupied 2/3 of the country and bombed it to smithereens and financed every reactionary force in that country, whether they be terrorists or not, other than the United States? If there's a criminal, it's the United States. We have no rights in Syria or anywhere else on earth, and that's why UNAC says, US out now, self-determination for all oppressed nations, hands off, out now. And finally, the United States has invaded, according to a what's that college, Evergreen College professor who did a study in other nations 145 times. Can anyone name a good invasion, a good war, starting with Native American destruction that this conference discussed? Do you think Syria is the exception? Do you think our hearts are in the right place in Syria? Do you think we're really not organizing a no-fly zone or a war of genocide in every Middle Eastern country, if not around the world? And what they have in mind for Syria and the Middle East is what they have in mind for us with regard to climate change, global warming, the gulag of the prison industrial complex, the entire backward, racist, barbaric nature of this system. And that is they subordinate everything human to the interests of the 1% and less. UNAC exists to unite all of the forces that we brought together in this conference against that beast, bring it down, mobilize people, massive, united, independent action. Long live UNAC, long live all the people in this world struggling for their elementary rights and freedom. Thank you.
All right, so it's time to move on and hear about the initiatives that we have going to support the countries of the Middle East. And so our next speaker is Baman Azad. Baman is organizational secretary and a member of the executive board of the U.S. Peace Council, NGO representative of the World Peace Council at the United Nations, member of the coordinating committee of the Hands Off Syria Coalition, and chair of the Iran Working Group of Veterans for Peace. Welcome, Assad.
I want to thank everybody for this great conference that we have had so far, and it was really educational for me, and thank you all for teaching us everything. Originally, I was planning to talk about the root causes of Syrian situation, but I think there was enough talk about imperialism, and I think talking about imperialism, in fact, I'll be preaching to the converted, so in a sense, there's no need for that. I decided to, and especially since Jeff also mentioned that he was talking about the Syrian situation a little bit, I thought maybe it would be better to talk about the coalition that we have created collectively. It has been a very successful coalition. It started last October after this delegation to Syria, and the attacks that arose as a result of that. Some people said they drank Assad's Kool-Aid, but they never said whose Kool-Aid they are drinking. Then accused us of being pro-Soviet, which is, I guess they've been sleeping for 25 years. And then ultimately they came up with these anti-imperialist camp people, which we probably accept from them, right? So the coalition work has been very successful. We had probably most of you know that we had a tour of Eva Bartlett throughout the United States and Canada, which was extremely successful and educational for everybody. We had 2 press conferences at the United Nations, which were also very, very welcomed by the movement around the world. But still a lot needs to be done, especially past few months. It seems that the nature of US involvement is also shifting in Syria. We started with bombing from far away and arming the terrorists and everything else. And gradually, lately, we started attacking Syrian forces. And now they're shooting at Syrian forces who are trying to approach certain areas that apparently now United States troops that have been stationed there or moving in there gradually, increasingly, they have been shooting at the Syrian forces not to get close, because apparently they are trying to carve out that place for this so-called moderate rebels. It seems that on the side there is also a plan of partition of Syria that is underway, and we have to be aware of that, because the involvement of Russia probably frustrated at least for now, the attempt to impose a forced regime change. So what I want to do is talk about the goals of the coalition that we created. I'm going to go over the document, the Points of Unity statement. Many of you probably have read it and also signed it, and many of you may not have heard it and have not signed it. So I want to make sure that all of us are on the same page on this, and also all of you have signed this document. There's 8 points of unity and then 4 demands in this document. It can be found on handsofsyriacoalition.net. I'm sure you can read that, plus other things, all the videos of the tour that we had. First point, the continuation of the war in Syria is the result of a US orchestrated intervention by the United States, NATO, and the regional allies and reactionary forces, the goal of which is regime change in Syria. Number 2, this policy of regime change in Syria is illegal and in clear violation of the United Nations Charter, the letter and spirit of international law, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 3, this policy of forced regime change is threatening the security of the region and the world and has increased the danger of direct confrontation between the United States and Russia, with the potential of nuclear catastrophe for the whole world. 4, war and US and EU sanctions have destabilized every sector of Syria's economy, transforming a once self-sufficient country into an aid-dependent nation. Half of the Syrian population is now displaced. A UNESCWA report reveals that these US sanctions on Syria are crippling aid work during the war, one of the largest humanitarian emergencies since World War II. Number 5, no foreign entity, be it a foreign government or an armed group, has the right to violate the fundamental rights of the Syrian people to independence, national sovereignty, and self-determination. This includes the right of the Syrian government to request and accept military assistance from other countries, as even the US government has admitted. 6, only the people of Syria have the inalienable right to choose their leaders and determine the character of their government, free from foreign intervention. This right cannot be properly exercised under the conditions of US orchestrated foreign intervention against the Syrian people. 7, our opposition is to force regime change in Syria by US-backed foreign powers and their mercenaries. It is not our business to support or oppose President Assad or the Syrian government. Only the Syrian people have the right to decide the legitimacy of their government. And finally, the most urgent issue at present is peace and putting an end to the violence of foreign intervention that has resulted in the deaths of hundreds and thousands of people and the displacement of millions of Syrians, both internally and as refugees abroad. On the basis of these observations and agreements, we came to 4 principal demands. 1, an immediate end to the US policy of forced regime change in Syria, and full recognition and compliance by US and NATO and their allies with the principles of international law and the UN Charter, including respect for the independence and territorial integrity of Syria. 2, an immediate end to all foreign aggression against Syria and serious effort toward a political resolution of the war. 3, an immediate end to all military, financial, logistical, and intelligence support by the US, NATO, and their regional allies to all foreign mercenaries and extremists in the Middle East region. And 4, an immediate end to economic sanctions against Syria, massive international and aid for displaced people within Syria and the Syrian refugees abroad. This was the points of unity and the demands of the Hands of Syria coalition that we put together, that was tremendously supported by good part of the world peace movement, including a lot of national peace organizations and peace movements throughout the world. And it was a great success. On the basis of that, we also supported recently the H.R. 608 bill presented to the U.S. Congress by Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii, who calls for ending arming terrorists. And we are in full support of that, and I encourage you to go to the website hr608.info and sign on to it. It's set up in a way that it would immediately dispatches your signed petition to 60 members of Intelligence and Foreign Relations committees of the House of Representatives. And finally, we have invited actually Stephen Gowans from Canada, the author of the most recently published book, Washington's Long War on Syria, to come and speak. He's going to be in New York on July 15th, speaking there in Manhattan, and then he's going to be in New Haven on the 16th, and then hopefully, where's Joe? Albany on the 17th. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your support.
Thank you. We're going to show a video. Gail Walker is going to be speaking. She's representing IFCO, the International Friendship with Cuba organization, often referred to as Pastors for Peace. They have an annual event, Cuba Friend Shipment Caravan, where they take resources to Cuba illegally. Who could imagine that? And so I'm going to have Gail, turn you over now to the video of Gail.
I send you greetings, friends, in my regret that I cannot be with you there this weekend at the UNAC conference, but I extend my gratitude to Phil Waleto, Anna Edwards, and other organizers of this weekend's activities for allowing me to send you this message via video. I want to wish you all the best as you gather this weekend to address the myriad of issues that we as a radical and progressive community are being confronted with, especially given the political climate that we find ourselves in. And I want to urge all of us to remember the contribution that Cuba has made to the world, and to look to Cuba as an example when we really suss out the kind of world that it is that we want to build, the world that we envision. That Cuba really remains a tremendous beacon, a wonderful example, an example of what it means to truly put people first. We know that Cuba has been a leader in the area of healthcare, education, sustainable development, that Cuba has really led the way when it comes to being a neighbor to the rest of the planet. I think really, and it's been said before, that the threat that Cuba poses is not a military threat. It's a threat of a good idea. It's a threat of what it means when the people and the leadership works together to ensure that the people receive all that they need to live healthy and prosperous lives. This is an especially important time as we look to the political climate here in the United States. We know that under the former President Barack Obama, there was at least an effort to begin to ease some of the restrictions on trade and travel that had been placed on Cuba for more than 50 years under a mean-spirited, brutal, harsh blockade. Some refer to it as an embargo, but make no mistake, it's a blockade. The fact that others have been pressured into also suspending their activities with Cuba points just to that fact. The reality is that while there were some steps that were made by the Obama administration, welcome steps, the blockade remained and still does in full effect. And that's made clear by probably two very important points. First of all, the fact that there is still a licensing procedure that people must go through even when they travel to Cuba. That is, you have to let the U.S. government know when you're going, where you're going, who you're seeing when you go there, how long you're going to be there, etc. It's the only country in the world in which restrictions on your ability to travel to a country has been imposed. So that is still the law of the land. There is also the fact that OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, that's the division within Treasury that enforces the quote-unquote embargo or blockade infractions. OFAC, since the Obama overtures back in December 17, 2014, has levied fines of nearly $3 million. So people are still being punished. Companies are still being punished for trading with Cuba, despite the fact that there have been these overtures to begin easing relations between the U.S. and Cuba. So make no mistake, the blockade is still in full effect. But now it's going to be made perhaps even worse by 45, the current occupant of the White House, who as early as later today, Friday, the 16th of June, will be making his announcement about what his Cuba policy will be. We know that he has been currying the favor of Cuban Americans, Cuban American leaders in Florida, such as Marco Rubio and Lincoln Diaz-Balart, trying to get them to support some of his domestic issues so that he might reverse some of what the Obama administration put into place. There is a lot of speculation as to what that announcement might entail. The reality is that this is a reversal. This is moving backward. And that is why we at IFCO Pastors for Peace, and I think Friends of Cuba across the globe, will continue to stand with Cuba, to recognize the tremendous accomplishments that Cuba has provided this world, and continue to push the U.S. government to do the right thing, to lift the blockade, to end this mean-spirited, brutal policy which has served no purpose, which has really only been a political tool of the conservative, imperialistic powers of the United States government over the more than half a century. So my hope is that you all will recall that, will remember that, will invoke those memories as we talk about a myriad of other issues that we're all concerned about, that there are links between those domestic issues, that when we're talking about what it means to really, truly push back against police brutality, when we are talking about what it means to truly put a healthcare plan in place in which all people can benefit, when we talk about what it means to truly allow people to forge the best in themselves, to push forward and gain educational opportunities. When we talk about what it means to really focus on gender equality, Cuba's an example. These are just some of the ways in which Cuba has provided assistance to the world. Of course, we can't forget the Latin America School of Medicine, the tremendous gift that Cuba has given to the world by providing a scholarship, free medical scholarships to thousands of people across this globe, hundreds here in the United States. IFCO is proud to play a role in facilitating that process, recruiting them, supporting them, and then bringing them home to serve in underserved communities right here in the United States. There's so many things that Cuba has done and continues to do, and we need to stand with her. We need to be there. We need to be vigilant. And my hope is that throughout this weekend, as we are talking about linkages, that Cuba is not forgotten. Let's remember that we can learn a lot, have learned a lot from our Cuban brothers and sisters. I wish you the best for a productive and powerful and impactful weekend, and look forward to hearing the resolutions that come from your gathering there in Richmond. Please remember us as we plan for our 28th caravan coming up this summer in July. For those of you who are interested in learning more, you can reach out to us at ifconews.org. We're here and still accepting applications for you to join with us in the travel challenge this July. No matter what 45 does, we're going to push forward. We're going to continue to say no U-turn on Cuba, and to continue to be supportive of all efforts to remain a true friend of Cuba and to push to end the blockade once and for all. Again, wishing you the best for a fruitful conference. Thank you.
Finally, last but not least, Eva Grazuska, a sociologist, was co-organizer of the 2016 Social Forum of Eastern Europe and cooperation between East and South. Local coordinator, Polish Party of Workers, 2006 to 2010. Candidate in local, national, and European elections. Co-organizer, demonstrations and conferences against the Iraq War and for workers' rights. Co-organizer, collaboration with social organizations in Tunisia. Eva was not able to be with us because she wasn't able to get a visa. So she finally sent a statement, which Anna Edwards is now going to read to you.
Thank you very much. I'll just let you know that Eva translated this into English herself. And while she's done a very good job, just bear with me if the sentences are just a little bit awkward, but it's a very good statement. And what she's chosen to talk about is the women's strike in order to prevent the government from banning abortion in Poland. Hello, dear comrades taking part in the United National AntiWar Conference in Richmond. I am Eva Grazuska, and I am an activist from Poland. Thank you very much for inviting me to the conference. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you, and I regret it a lot. It would be great to meet comrades from all over the world, and it would be really amazing to meet comrades from the USA. I could not come to Richmond because the people in the embassy did not recognize that I needed an appointment in the embassy before June 15th to receive a visa. They proposed the appointment on the 16th, so it was too late. I am going to say a few words about the events, the last events in Poland called Black Protest Against Anti-Abortion Law. But first I want to say a few words about the current government, which consists of one party, Law and Justice. Officially, this party is related with the social teachings of the Catholic Church, but in reality, the representatives of the government used racist rhetoric against Muslim refugees who are absent in Poland because the government does not want to take them in. Law and Justice is associated with a chauvinist part of the Catholic Church and moreover supports the church with money and other benefits. But what I want to emphasize is that this is also the first government since the 1990s which provides social benefits for children and which cares a bit for workers' conditions, raising hourly rates, for example. This party plays in some aspects the role of social democracy now when the official Social Democratic Party decided to realize a more neoliberal policy. The result is that even people who are disgusted with the chauvinism of the ruling party support it, being afraid of perspectives when neoliberals from left to open banksters come back into power. On September 23rd, the Polish parliament decided to work on a proposal of citizens called Ordo Juris, titled Stop Abortion, and rejected a project titled Save the Women. The Stop Abortion project proposed the absolute ban of abortion and penalties for women. The current law, called a compromise and supported by neoliberal opposition, allows abortion in 3 cases: when mother's life is in danger, when there is a probability of fetus damage, when pregnancy is the consequence of crime. When the public was informed about the government plans, their irritation and anger grew by the day. The group of members of a new social democratic party called Together, Razem, also called for action on Facebook based on the publication of photos of women in black clothes. Facebook was full of such pictures, but it was not enough. And it was at that moment that an actress, popular and active during the so-called socialism time, called for organizing the strike of women and protesting on the streets. It is true that without the involvement of the neoliberal media, interested from time to time in human rights, the numbers on the streets would not have been so huge. It is the reason why it was so strong. On October 5th, many people went out on the street wearing black clothes. In some cities, protest was led by neoliberal opposition, but in many places by local activists. There was really a spontaneous and good atmosphere. Many employers gave the day off for female workers and some university departments for students. There were many active students from secondary schools and many nurses that day on the streets. Protest was organized in big cities, but in smaller towns as well. It is a very significant fact because the position of the Catholic Church in small towns is very high, so people taking part in the women's strike showed great courage. Protests lasted the whole of October, with a radicalization that requires demands for the liberalization of abortion law. Neoliberal opposition was not happy because of this, tried to control the more radical activists. Finally, the government gave up and withdrew the proposal of an absolute ban on abortion. However, a few weeks ago, they started fighting against the opportunity of buying the day after pill without a prescription. This protest was very spectacular and showed that even Catholic women do not want to be hostages of church ideology. I know personally women who took part in the Black protest and in the women's strike, and at the same time they are very glad of having the benefits for children thanks to the ruling party. It means that Polish women are just pragmatic, and they expect a left policy regarding free choice and social security. Another bomb which is prepared by the government is a pro-war plan associated with subordination to United States policy. There is no opposition to this in Parliament and among so-called social democratic parties. Only the radical left is openly against the war. Ordinary people who do not want a war are being manipulated by the media, but their involvement in protest is very doubtful because the official position as characterized by the media will not support it the way that they did the women's strike. The international solidarity of anti-war activists will be needed then more than ever. I wish you a wonderful time together and am sending greetings from all anti-capitalists and anti-war Polish comrades. Okay.
So I want to thank all of the wonderful speakers on this panel and the senders of such poignant messages. And I want to introduce Anna Edwards, who just spoke now, who is going to facilitate the next panel, the abbreviated panel that will close out today's meeting. So, pardon me for a minute. The organization of things here has been a little confusing for me, but here we go. I just want to tell you that Anna is a graduate student in history and chairs the Defenders Sacred Ground Historical Reclamation Project here in Richmond. Since 2002, the Defenders have worked to reclaim and properly memorialize Richmond's Shockoe Bottom, once the center of the U.S. domestic slave trade, including the current struggle for a 9-acre memorial park. And so now I give you Anna, who will carry the program forward to its conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd actually like to go ahead and ask Ajamu Baraka, Jaribu Hill, Cassia Laham, David Swanson, and Clarence Thomas to please come up. So the original plan for this evening, as you all know, was that we were going to have cultural performances and rousing speeches. And even as I watch, it's been a long day, it's been a rich day, and so there may not be quite as many of you in the audience as there was a little earlier today. I see die-hard faces, but I'd also like to remind everyone that we are being live streamed. And that means that there are an awful lot of people out there who are watching or who will watch this. And so we have an opportunity to close the evening out today with your most pointed, I won't say concise because that's kind of mean, because I think this is a really strong group of people who have some really good things to say. They're going to practice maybe a little haiku idea in their minds about how to get the word out there powerfully, energetically, and with the message that we need to send us off to supper, to sleep, and to a rejuvenated discussion for the morning. So I want to thank you all for being here this evening. Very quickly, I'm going to read a message that did not get read before. It's one paragraph, but it is from the Council of the Committee of Mothers of May 2nd. They sent a message specifically for this conference. Dear participants, we would like to thank all of you who have taken part in the action that backed the Committee of Mothers of Odessa for all these years. We are now in isolation, and we are from time to time under repression because of the fact that we keep the memory of our assassinated relatives and friends who died on the 2nd of May, 2014. And in such circumstances, it is extremely important that your solidarity and sincere words of support are shaped into real actions. We are grateful for your words of support because they are the only small thing that we can respond to when you give us all this help. Please believe us that we are the very people who share your ideas and values of the anti-war movement. Alas, we have experienced sorrow and understand the meaning of these words, war came into our house. We really hope that your mutual people's movement against war will win the day against hatred, aggression, and great lies. No war, only peace. Committee of Mothers, May 2. So you have heard from most of these folks. So Clarence is not here apparently. So we are going to go ahead and hear from Ajamu, Jaribu, David, and Cassia in that order. I am not going to introduce them again. They are going to give you some awesome words to take us out.
Okay. All right. Yeah. This has been really a very, very outstanding, very informative, very historic gathering this weekend. I'm so honored and glad to be here. I'm so honored to be with all of you who are some of the most dedicated, revolutionary, radical folks I've been around in quite some time. So give yourself a round of applause. My friends, we have a lot of work to do, and I think this weekend is going to prepare us for the historic mission that we have. We have to build a movement that's going to bring this country the kind of peace and tranquility, the kind of humane living that the people of this society deserve. No one can do this but us. It is our responsibility. We have the political line, we have the perspective, we have the energy, we have the analysis. This is what I'm going to leave this conference with. This understanding that UNAC is uniquely positioned to be the force to build the kind of anti-war, anti-imperialist movement that we have to build at this moment. My friends, I'm going to yield my time to someone that I think deserves more opportunity to bring the kind of message we have to hear this evening. You will hear from me again tomorrow morning. But I want to bring to the podium someone who's been an inspiration to me for many, many years. I call her, and she doesn't like this, but I call her the current Fannie Lou Hamer of our time. She is one of the most powerful organizers, orators, revolutionaries in this country. So I bring to the podium our dear sister, Jaribu Hill.
Thank you. It's so good to be on the right side of history. So good not to be a sellout. So good not to be a pig of any color. So good to be wanting to topple, just to topple it, not put a Band-Aid on it, not try to put it in a sling, not try to put an ace bandage on it, but to actually crush it, to break the legs off, to break the arms off, to break the head, to chop off the neck of imperialism. Imperialism, we are standing fighting on bloody soil. And thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna, for taking me to Shackled Bottom since I couldn't go to the march tomorrow. Thank you so much, sister, for taking me there and making me walk those steps and making me feel underneath my feet where our ancestors are buried because of the brutal auction block enterprise. We don't have time to slow down. We don't have time to pretend like we can still be Democrats. We don't have time to pretend like this shit can work. You know it can't work. You know it can't work. You tried it. You tried it for years. You tried it for decades. You tried to coalesce with it. Some of y'all more than others. We were in a different left group, so we didn't believe in peaceful coexistence. But those of you who did, you got shot in the head with that one, because there is no way you can peacefully coexist when you used to be capital. There's no way you can agree with capitalism when your people used to be sold and inventoried like cows and furniture. So what are we saying for UNAC today? UNAC is critical, it's important, and let's shout out for the launch of the Black Alliance for Peace. That's right, it's nothing new. Black people have always understood that we're at war. It's not a new thing. But what it is it's bringing it back. And thank you, Brother Ajamu, and those who brought it back to our consciousness, to our memory and our understanding that we cannot support any wars. We cannot support, we don't have a dog in any of those hunts. And what did Bob Marley say? What did Bob Marley say? And I know y'all thought no culture. We didn't have time for the cultural work. Well, from now on, I'm on the committee, and I want you to stop having hours and hours of talking heads, because otherwise you miss out on what I'm bringing you now. Keep on fighting. Keep on fighting. I'm sorry I won't be able to be with you tomorrow. I got another stop to make. But peace and power, revolutionary victories for all oppressed people, for all the sufferers. Let's just chase those bald heads, as Bob Marley said, out of town.
Did you all hear about Donald Trump about 2 or 3 days ago calling up the mayor of Tangier Island in the Chesapeake Bay and telling him that contrary to all appearances, his island was not sinking? And the point I want to make is that the man believed what he was told rather than what he saw. Did you hear about the Secretary of War, James Mattis, telling Congress a few days ago that for the 16th year in a row, they're going to bring a plan to win the war on Afghanistan? And Congress either believed it or they've been paid enough to act like they believed it. We need radical reforms in our education system that go beyond ending standardized tests, shrinking classrooms, training and paying teachers. We need courses taught in every school in the subjects of social change, nonviolent action, and refining practical techniques for the successful recognition of bullshit. And I include in that the idea that there is something violence can accomplish in the world that nonviolence cannot accomplish better. That's bullshit. Did you know that down the road in Charlottesville, Virginia, we got our city to vote to take down the statue of Robert E. Lee put up by racists in the 1920s? And we ran into a problem because there is a state law in Virginia that forbids taking down any war monument. Now there is a law, if ever there was one, that needs to be repealed in this capital of the Confederacy, or at least amended to require an equal-sized monument to peace for every monument to war.
Yeah, yes.
Have you noticed that the same people who rigged their primary to nominate one of the only candidates on earth who could have lost to Donald Trump are now targeting Trump with the one and only accusation that can blow up in their faces for lack of proof or blow up in everybody's face in the form of a nuclear war? Meanwhile, Donald Trump is openly guilty of illegal wars, illegal prejudicial bans on immigrants, illegal willful destruction of the Earth's environment, unconstitutional domestic and foreign profiteering from his public office, and a whole laundry list of crimes from sexual assault to voter intimidation. Nancy Pelosi says do nothing. Sit back, relax. The man is going to, and this is her new word, self-impeach. I respectfully suggest that people no more self-impeach than wars self-end, guns self-ban, police self-reform, energy systems self-convert, schools self-improve, houses self-build, or planets self-protect themselves. The only strategy this mindset is going to lead us to is self-destruction. Congress clearly will not self-govern. We have to impose our will. We have to understand that what is needed is to create what is needed against the concerted efforts of those in power. Power concedes nothing without a demand, said Frederick Douglass. Let's do some demanding. Thank you.
All right, David.
All right. Who's hungry?
We'll eat after.
All right, guys. So my name is Cassia. You've seen and heard enough of me tonight. This is my last time, I promise. Thank you for coming out to UNAC 2017. Yeah! So we have folks from across the country and even from across the sea. It's amazing. We got people from Colombia. We got people from Hungary. This was an amazing moment of unification. And this weekend we came together to organize and to strategize, to educate and to demonstrate with one clear goal in mind: stop all U.S. wars.
Right. That's right.
Stop the wars at home. Stop the wars at home against black and brown communities who are occupied and terrorized by police and poverty. Stop the wars at home against the entire working class, whose wages, healthcare, and homes have been stolen from them. Stop the wars at home against immigrants who are being deported back to the same countries that U.S. imperialism wrecked.
Ooh, that's right. Speak now.
And let's stop the wars abroad. Let's stop the wars abroad against countries like Yemen, Afghanistan, and Palestine.
Yes. Yes.
Stop the attempts at bloody regime change against Venezuela, Cuba, Ukraine, and Iran. Stop the U.S. government from dragging us closer to what will inevitably be a nuclear war with Russia or China. All of us here understand that we must oppose U.S. imperialism in all of its different forms. Like I said yesterday, being a pro-Cuba, pro-Venezuela activist in Miami, trust me, I know that sometimes it can be a little isolating to be in the anti-war movement. But in meetings like these, we find out the truth. The truth is that we are not alone. We are not alone. Each of us in all of our various groups, we need to organize together, stand side by side, and fight U.S. militarism together. And we must continue to do so if we plan on winning more people over to the movement and if we plan on actually stopping this bloody war machine.
That's right.
So I thank all of you for your participation in this conference. And I urge you to get everybody's numbers, get to know each other, exchange names, emails, attend all the panels that you can, attend all the workshops with open minds and with this idea in mind. Every time we take to the streets, every time we hold petition drives, every time we hold call-in days, every time we strike another blow against the U.S. imperialist war machine, and every time we do that, they tremble in their boots because they know we're getting a little bit more organized, a little bit more galvanized, a little bit more unified, and that much closer to winning. So if war is tough, we must be tougher. If U.S. imperialism never sleeps, then we must be tireless. And if U.S. troops are on the streets of Syria, Ukraine, or Iraq, we must take to the streets here at home.
And when any country or any people is under attack, you better be rest assured that we are going to stand up and fight back. Right. Stand up, fight back. Stand up, fight back. Stand up,
Fight back.